and how unbecoming it is
Yeah.
of someone that is in a position that's billed as leader of the free world.
Let me now bring you that statement from Prince Harry. It's a fairly lengthy one. He says in 2001, NATO invoked Article 5 for the first and only time in history. It meant that every allied nation was obliged to stand with the United States in Afghanistan in pursuit of our shared security. Allies answered that call. I served there. I made lifelong friends there, and I lost friends there. The United Kingdom alone had 457 service personnel killed. Thousands of lives were changed forever. Mothers and fathers buried sons and daughters. Children were left without a parent. Families are left carrying the cost. Those sacrifices deserve to be spoken about truthfully and with respect, as we all remain united and loyal to the defence of diplomacy and peace. So a very strong statement there from Prince Harry, isn't it, Penny?
It is, and I can understand why he's put it out. I think what we also have to try and do in all of this is also remain focused on our common threats and our common interests. And I think I've heard many interviews from many people who have served, who've been rightly moved to put their views out there. And that is also what they're saying. It's about the depth of our bonds and our relationship with US armed forces, but also particularly other NATO nations as well. And so that's what we need to focus on in all of this as well. But I do hope that the president really does take into account. This isn't the first time we've had these kinds of comments about our service personnel. We've had them from the vice president as well. And I think it's right that people are voicing how disappointed they are and how unbecoming it is
Yeah.
of someone that is in a position that's billed as leader of the free world.
Not that I think we'll get any apology out of Donald Trump, because I don't think I've ever heard him say sorry for anything. Well, let's start with what else but the New World Order, because we've endured another white-knuckle week on the world stage, thanks to the whims of the US president. After making increasingly aggressive demands to own Greenland last week on Truth Social, Donald Trump raised the stakes, threatening tariffs on 8 NATO countries, including the UK, until a deal could be reached. It all culminated in his speech in Davos on Wednesday.
We pay for NATO, and we paid for many years until I came along. We paid for, in my opinion, 100% of NATO because they weren't paying their bills. And all we're asking for is to get Greenland, including right title and ownership, because you need the ownership to defend it. You can't defend it on a lease. Number one, legally it's not defensible that way, totally. And number two, psychologically.
Well, later that night, again on Truth Social, we saw a climb down from the president on his tariff for now. But the rupture, as Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney called it, in the world order is there for all to see. Penny, let me hear from you first. That has this debacle really shown that Europe can stand up to Donald Trump and tame him, or has it shown the EU to be pretty weak and divided?
I think that Europe is starting to get better and more experienced in dealing with this president. And so it doesn't necessarily take everything that he says as something that is going to come to pass. So I think people are getting more experienced about handling him, and all the sort of the back channels that work overtime during these kinds of situations, I think, are getting better about managing these sorts of situations. I think the president has had a point in terms of that part of the world and our security, but clearly the other things he've been saying, I don't think people have taken completely seriously, and didn't hesitate to put up a united front and push back.
Helena, are we dealing with Donald Trump in the right way? Is Keir Starmer still cozying up to him too much?
Well, I mean, let's be clear. He's between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, there's this business of wanting to have the deal that was promised and firmed up, and I'm afraid it's still teetering on the brink of whether it will be as was intended. And I think on the one hand, he's desperately keen for us to retain the relationship. I'm not sure how special it is, but to basically get that deal in place. And on the other hand, I'd like to hear him being much bolder. We know, I mean, Donald Trump is a bully, and the only way to deal with bullies is to actually show that you've got mettle yourself, look them straight in the eye and say, that can't happen. And we're not going to accept that. So I was thrilled today to hear our Prime Minister actually confront him and express outrage at the suggestion that we had not played our part when proportionately we lost as many as America lost in the business of Afghanistan.
Well, let me just play the clip before we move on to discuss that a little bit more. Let me just play the clip that Donald Trump, what he said about NATO troops in that interview with Fox News.
I've always said, will they be there if we ever needed them? And that's really the ultimate test. And I'm not sure of that. I know that we would have been there, or we would be there. But will they be there? And let's hope that that never happens. We've never needed them. We have never really asked anything of them. You know, they'll say they sent some troops to Afghanistan or this or that. And they did. They stayed a little back.
Helena, you're pleased that Keir Starmer called that out in quite aggressive terms.
I absolutely am, and I think it was disgraceful. But you see, the problem with Donald Trump is that he's read nothing. He's seriously ignorant historically. Factually, he gets so much stuff wrong that you really have to fact check almost every sentence that comes out of his mouth. And the problem with all of that is that he has no understanding of what NATO really stood for and what its meaning was, and the benefits that are also brought to the United States, and the way in which we rallied after 9/11 around the United States of America, and the many young men that there are now who are linless because, and on top of the deaths that proportionately were high and not any different from the United States, even Denmark, that he traduces at the moment, lost, a proportion of its small population in the Afghanistan, resource that was NATO. And so, I mean, I really was outraged by it, as anybody would who knows anything about the soldiers who came back linless and the families that lost beloved people. So that's
Penny.
Why hasn't the Prime Minister also been much bolder in confronting him about his total disregard for law and his total disregard for international law, which we are supposed to stand for?
I'll come back to that point, but Penny, if I could just pick up what you thought when you heard what Donald Trump, you're a former Defence Secretary. What did you think when you heard what he said about Afghanistan?
Well, it is not UK armed forces or NATO that is diminished by these remarks. I'm afraid it's the president. And you can see that in the reaction that's coming from all quarters. I spoke about this a little earlier today, and your listeners will know the numbers now very well of British casualties and wider NATO casualties. But I took some time to tell some of the stories of heroism that sit behind those numbers, and I had a lot to choose from. Every part of our armed forces was involved in saving US lives, whether that's retrieving injured service personnel, in some incredible battles that some of your previous guests have spoken about, but also rescuing civilians and hostages as well. And amongst those stories is Al Cairns, who you heard from just
the Veterans Minister
program. Yes, Al won the Military Cross for a particular action in Afghanistan, which is absolutely incredible. And I think that maybe the president, if he wants to read up on this a little bit more, might like to read Al's citation.
Yeah, but as Helena's pointed out, we don't believe he's ever picked up a book. But Helena, your point about wanting the Prime Minister to tackle him on the legal issues. I mean, you could pick any number of things. Tariffs, that's currently in the courts in America. Greenland, there's serious doubts about whether that's legal. And obviously there's the ghost ships and whether boarding those ghost ships is legal. What did you have in mind?
I mean, listen, we have a Prime Minister who himself is a very distinguished lawyer and was immersed in international law and our own domestic law. And it's one of the things that we stand proud in the world of representing, the rule of law, that nobody was above the law, that came out of Magna Carta and all of that. That's in our DNA in the United Kingdom. And we should be speaking proudly about that and saying when we see transgressions. And I'm afraid that's the bit of the world order that he's particularly assaulting. And for me, it's one of the tragedies of his presidency is that he doesn't care a hoot about law, and that he's the man of the deal, and everything is about money and enriching both the United States, also himself and his family. And the whole thing is for me a tragedy of what America used to the world.
And on that legal point, if I may just follow up on that, Helena, the Board of Peace, Mark Carney's had his invite withdrawn. The list of members includes Vladimir Putin, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. I mean, is this just an attempt to sort of tear up the UN? Is there any justification given that the UN has had its fair share of critics from across the political spectrum?
Including me. I mean, I would like to see the whole business of the vetoes that currently exist in the hands of both China and Russia, but also of the United States, revisited. I think that we should be reconsidering the constitutional arrangements of NATO, which has made them weak and powerless in recent times. So I think that yes, we could have a reconfiguring, a new League of Nations, or whatever you want to call it, but it certainly isn't. Space is not going to be filled by Donald Trump's new entity, which he is the imperium of. To rule it, he is going to decide who is going to follow him in that position. It'll probably be one of his sons, and he's picking and choosing who might be involved in it. And I don't see sufficient Palestinian voices involved. So for me, this is about, of course, it's about trying to replace the world order in a way that he would prefer, but it is absolutely not in the way that was conceived when the United Nations was bringing together all nations, big and small, protection for everybody, and middle-sized nations and small nations haven't got a voice in this really at all.